you filthy, dirty swines. Get in here. Sit down. Make sure you like and subscribe. But for now, let's crack on. There's a funny clash between profit and health when it comes to fast food and convenience food. And I've come to think of most candies and yummy stuff as effectively being tasty poison. And I was thinking about this long before I even really knew of the existence of RFK Jr. And I've come to really respect the chap. So, full disclosure, I'm a fan of RFK and I am biased towards this chap and what he's been trying to do. You'll see on this article on Politico, written by Carmen Pawn, Grace Yarrow, Sophie Gardner, Lauren Gardner. Oh, what are they, married or are they related? And Tim Rohn. All of them together came together as some kind of political writing team of Power Rangers, and they made this. RFK Jr.'s battle with the public health establishment has turned to trench warfare. Bloody hell, what are they chucking at each other? Chucking vitamins at each other over ditches, and the other side's throwing needles with vaccines in, maybe? I don't know. The health secretary turned his agencies towards skepticism of processed food and vaccines, but he's faced pushback at every turn, including from Republicans. Well, it's always good to have people criticizing what you do because it makes you more honest, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think his personal agenda is very honorable, so that's my bias. Let's jump into this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spent the spring of 2025 repeating the campaign message he delivered over and over in 2024 before he dropped out of the presidential race and joined forces with Donald Trump. Kids were sicker than ever, and ultra-processed, sugar-laden foods cooked up in labs or grown with dangerous chemicals were responsible. It's a pretty clear message, yeah. Upon being sworn in as Trump's health secretary, Kennedy launched a Make America Healthy Again commission to explore the poor state of American children's health and ways to improve it. As the commission prepared to issue a report assessing threats to children's health in May, farmers worried it would echo Kennedy's campaign rhetoric and attack their way of doing business. Farmers, though? Why farmers? Food producers turned to what they considered their last line of defense, lobbying Republican lawmakers whose home state economies hung in the balance. Mississippi Senator Cindy Hyde Smith, among the Republicans who had put aside Kennedy's broadsides against their allies in agriculture and voted to confirm him, raised the issue at an Appropriations Committee hearing on May 20. She zeroed in on what Kennedy's long-stated theory that some chemicals farmers use to kill insects and weeds are dangerous to human health. Well, perhaps they are. I know we got rid of DDT, which was a pretty nasty chemical used as an insecticide yonks ago, and there's no reason to believe that other unhealthy chemicals are being used that perhaps maybe they don't need to be. I don't know. Let's read this. It's going to be a shame if the MAHA Commission issues a report suggesting without substantial fact and evidence that our government got things terribly wrong when it reviewed a number of crop protection tools and deemed them to be safe, Hyde Smith told Kennedy. Kennedy said he was not going to put a single farmer in this country out of business. Surely you'd just be suggesting that they buy other products, not put them out of business. They're not the producers of the chemicals, they're the users of the chemicals. He added that America's corn production relied on glyphosate, the world's most commonly used herbicide. Okay. 7 years before, in his prior career as an environmental lawyer, Kennedy had sued the pesticides manufacturer, winning a multi-million-dollar judgment for his client, a groundskeeper who said glyphosate had given him cancer. Oh, is that the chap that got cancer from Roundup? Is that glyphosate? In May, he told the senators he was not going to do anything to jeopardize farmers' business model. Well, it's a problem, isn't it? If you're relying on chemicals that are poisonous, just as the automotive industry relied on gasoline that had a lot of lead in it in the past, that's poisonous and things had to change. So perhaps we've got to take it on the nose. When the White House released the commission's report 2 days after the hearing, it held back from repeating Kennedy's confirmation hearing bombast that McDonald's and the maker of Fruit Loops mass poison American children. Well, that's perhaps not their agenda, but if they're using products or chemicals or whatever that have dangerous side effects that they were unaware of, then maybe. I know. But there was still plenty to anger food producers. The 72-page document asserted that children suffer more from chronic diseases and behavioral disorders than any previous generation, with their diets a likely culprit. It targeted glyphosate, saying it and another herbicide, atrazine, were present in the blood of children and pregnant women at alarming levels. Studies of glyphosate have noted a range of possible health effects, ranging from reproductive and development disorders as well as cancers, liver inflammation, and metabolic disturbances. The report declared the German conglomerate Bayer, which sells the chemical as Roundup, there we go, yes, says it does not cause cancer, although the chap won that case, didn't he? Because it caused cancer? Was that not the reason? Well, the fact that they say it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't. I don't know. That's a bit mixed up there. The White House worked to soothe the industry revolt, meeting with nearly 50 agricultural groups. Top farm state Republican lawmakers decided to take their concerns directly to Kennedy. A group of senators, including Hyde Smith and Agriculture Committee Chair John Bozeman, saw the secretary in the White House's Roosevelt room. According to 4 people with knowledge of the meeting granted anonymity to share details about an encounter they weren't authorized to discuss publicly. After the senators told Kennedy he must back off on pesticides, the meeting turned heated, in the words of 3 of the people. At one point, Kennedy pounded on the table, one said, as the exchange failed miserably to calm the skeptical Republicans. The 4th person called the meeting productive. The senators' offices didn't respond to the requests for comment. Kennedy got the message. When his commission released a follow-up report in September proposing solutions to the problem it had identified in May, the new document didn't touch pesticides. Glyphosate wasn't mentioned. Trump's alliance with Kennedy helped him win a second term in the White House and elevated a scion of America's most famous Democratic family. Lawyer for environmentalist causes and anti-vaccine activist, to lead health policy for a GOP that hasn't traditionally liked any of those things. I don't think calling him an anti-vaccine activist, he's more of a rational vaccine activist from what I've seen, but I am biased. I like the chap, so, take my opinion with a pinch of salt, or glyphosate if you prefer that. Over the course of his year in the cabinet, Kennedy has racked up major wins for his Make America Healthy Again movement by pushing the limits of his executive authority. He has reduced the number of vaccines the government recommends and promoted new guidelines that track his view that people should replace the ultra-processed foods in their diets with red meat and whole milk, among other previously discouraged sources of nourishment. Previously discouraged, yes, but the things that we're led to believe are healthy or not seem to change all the time, so it's hard to say. Lots of things have been previously discouraged, like eggs, for instance. Oh, eggs are bad for you. Oh, now they're good for your brain. I don't know. I like eggs. I eat eggs. Let's eat some more eggs. That's just my advice for myself. It's a joy to work for Trump because he lets me do stuff that I don't think anybody else would ever let me do. Kennedy told Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts at an event on February the 9th, marking his first year as secretary. But he's not been able to rewrite the country's laws in a way that would make any of those changes durable. Whoever replaces him as health secretary can reverse his wins as quickly as he achieved them. I suppose if they bear fruit, if they actually have positive effects, then, maybe people might stick with them. Already his vaccine and food policy moves have prompted lawsuits and petitions that could reverse them even before Kennedy leaves office. That limitation on his influence has been most visible in the tug-of-war pesticides regulation with Republican senators and the industry lobbyists who back them. Big glyphosate is lobbying the Republicans. I wouldn't be surprised. That's the direction money goes in, I suppose. Kennedy told students at a George Washington University town hall in November he didn't have authority over the chemicals used in agriculture, which is the purview of the Environmental Protection Agency. Are there alternatives, though? If there are, good. Promote those. Kennedy's aversion to regulation, his own aides have acknowledged, is about avoiding the long, drawn-out process required to write them. Kennedy also knows there's little prospect Congress will help him, giving pushback from the public health establishment, food and medical industries to his ideas. Democratic lawmakers are aligned with the former, while many Republicans on Capitol Hill still back the latter. The fierce resistance to change by the existing bureaucracy has created major challenges, as had been the partisan congressional gaming and obstruction. said Robert Malone, a Kennedy ally and vice chair of a vaccine advisory panel at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I think Dr. Robert Malone was one of the inventors of the mRNA vaccines that were doing the rounds during the pandemic. HHS did not make the secretary available for an interview for this story. HHS spokesperson Andrew Nixon said that under Secretary Kennedy's leadership, HHS is exercising its full authority to deliver results for the American people. On the anniversary of his swearing in on Friday, Kennedy shook up his leadership team, moving Deputy Secretary Jim O'Neill and General Counsel Mike Stewart out and promoting Chris Klomp. It's a good old name there, Chris, on top of the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Service to oversee all department operations. A White House official granted anonymity to discuss the shakeup said it was about muscling up the management team in advance of the midterm election campaign. Kennedy's second year will likely determine whether MAHA agenda hardens into GOP orthodoxy or whether the MAHA-MAGA alliance fades as a temporary compact of election year opportunism. I hope it lasts. I think it's a good agenda, and I think if it's a rational plan to make sure all of our industries are healthy, particularly the ones that end up depositing food in our mouths, then that's a good thing. Maybe glyphosate isn't bad. Maybe there's an alternative to it. I don't know. I'm not an expert, but I think the process of bumping heads to make this kind of thing happen, wrangling up experts who agree or disagree, is going to be nothing but positive, I would imagine. To make it last, Kennedy will have to show he can win over the forces that most foiled his first-year ambitions, convincing Republicans that voters will reward them for backing his fights against food and pharma, and they can manage any revolt that follows in corporate America. I mean, his fights against food and pharma, he's not necessarily fighting them, he's probably trying to get them on board, I imagine. It's the best way to win a battle is to actually find allies and build alternatives. So I doubt he's saying glyphosate bad, no alternative. There must be alternatives that he suggests, or he is finding experts to advise him for alternatives, I imagine. I don't know. When Kennedy arrived for his swearing in on February 13th, 2025, the Health and Human Services Department was already in the crosshairs of the Trump administration's budget-cutting ambitions. Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency had been there for days at work on a major downsizing, and White House officials had likewise already begun considering a plan to reduce the department's budget by 25%. Kennedy was caught unaware by much of these plans. He later acknowledged in the congressional testimony. Kennedy spent the first months of his administration on damage control. When he learned of the White House's plan to end Head Start, the health care and education program for low-income toddlers, those toddlers, they haven't got very good jobs, those toddlers. Send them down into the mines. They could be miners, double miners, down in the treacle mines, that his uncle Sergeant Shriver helped create in 1965. Kennedy appealed directly to Russ Vought, the powerful director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, to ensure its funding was protected. I'm going to have a better and brighter head start by the end of this administration, Health Secretary told the Senate panel in May. They were really very harsh on Kennedy, and he did a great job of standing his ground. In congressional testimony, Kennedy mostly defended the administration's budget and the broader downsizing, arguing the health department was spending money inefficiently and returning poor results. After Republican lawmakers took issue with cuts that affected their constituents, Kennedy backtracked. He called some National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health employees back last spring, for example, after an outcry from firefighters unions and senators, including West Virginia's Shelley Moore Capito, a Republican who represents workers at NIOSH's Morgantown office. Part of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, NIOSH focuses on the health and safety of coal miners, firefighters, and 9/11 survivors. I understand the health concerns and how brave you have to be to undertake that kind of work, Kennedy told Senate appropriators in June. We need to protect our miners. HHS reinstated all NIOSH employees last month. When the Office of Management and Budget in June froze roughly $15 billion in research money for the National Institute of Health, NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya called Kennedy, according to a senior HHS official granted anonymity to disclose internal conversations. Kennedy told Bhattacharya to reach out to Republican Alabama Senator Katie Britt, among others. Britt took the argument straight to the White House. warning Trump that his own budget director was in effect defunding children's cancer research and other marquee NIH programs, the official said. Britt and 13 other Republican senators, including Senate Appropriations Chair Susan Collins of Maine, told Voight in a letter that suspending the appropriated funds could threaten Americans' ability to access better treatments. Voight released the NIH funds, chalking up the freeze to a programmatic review, but he did call for a dramatic overhaul of the NIH in a CBS interview at the time. Neither the NIH nor Britt's office responded to a request for comment. Congress in January rejected the 40% cut to the NIH budget the White House sought when lawmakers passed a fiscal 2026 appropriation bill, keeping the funding flat at nearly $49 billion. Kennedy may end up spending some of that money on projects Democrats and Republican lawmakers won't like. Kennedy and Bhattacharya, sorry, I really can't say your name, Bhattacharya have already begun rerouting millions to studies on autism, which Kennedy links to vaccines. Maybe. There was mention that acetaminophen taken by pregnant women could be contributing to that. Not a doctor though. Bhattacharya has also vowed to redirect research funds away from elite coastal universities in the heartland. Researchers at the elite institute say they've built up decades of infrastructure, knowledge, and staffing that can't easily be replicated elsewhere. Moving money away, they argue, could threaten medical breakthroughs and the nation's standing as the global leader in biomedical research and development. I have no illusion that this bill alone will stop Secretary Kennedy's non-stop misinformation attacks on our health system. Not a fan of his. Senator Patty Murray of Washington, the top Democrat on the Appropriations Committee, told Politico. Well, just because you say something's misinformation doesn't necessarily mean it is misinformation. Hang on. So there's disinformation, misinformation. Misinformation is mistaken information. Disinformation is information that's deliberately incorrect. Yes? The number of Trump nominees rejected by GOP senators can be counted on one hand. Dave Weldon, a former Florida representative who was Kennedy's first choice to lead the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, was among them. Like Kennedy, Weldon has argued the government has covered up safety problems with vaccines, that vaccines cause autism, and that the government regulators are corrupted by pharma influence. Or whichever direction money flows in, there tends to be some corruption. While Republicans were willing to confirm Kennedy anyway, they wouldn't accept Weldon. The White House told Weldon he didn't have the votes and withdrew his nomination. Weldon said in a statement at the time, Weldon said he'd expected his nomination to die in the Senate Health Committee because of the opposition from the panel's chair, Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, or Susan Collins of Maine. Lisa Murkowski of Alaska had also told the White House she was troubled by the nominee's vaccine views. The drive between Kennedy's plans for the agency and Republican lawmakers' wishes grew from there. After Kennedy in August ousted the official who was his second choice to lead the agency, Susan Moneres, she said because she refused to rubber stamp changes to the vaccine schedule, he'd said she told him she was untrustworthy. GOP senators rebuked him. I've grown deeply concerned, Wyoming's John Barroso, a doctor and second-ranking senator in the GOP caucus, told Kennedy at a September Finance Committee hearing. Barroso added that he thought upending the government's process for reviewing vaccines. Kennedy had fired the members of the CDC advisory panel in June and replaced them, in some cases, with vaccine safety skeptics. It was confusing Americans. All these M-dashes to me just scream AI. Perhaps I'm wrong. I've never seen the use of M-dashes before AI became such a big thing. It just, for me, hasn't really been something I've spotted. A recent poll said 89% of voters, 81% of Trump voters, agree vaccine recommendations should come from trained physicians, scientists, public health experts, Barroso said. They should also be coming from those experts who are impartial. So if they have ties to any particular corporation that, for me, would be suspect, the advice given from representatives of a particular corporation may favor that corporation. At the very least, that would be a conflict of interests. So yes, well-informed is good, and I don't think there's any reason to believe that Kennedy is ill-informed. He may not be a doctor, but he's certainly well-informed, in my opinion. I'm not a doctor, so don't listen to me. The poll, on which GOP senators had been briefed before the hearing, came from Fabrizio Ward, which counts Trump pollster Tony Fabrizio among its partners. In a survey released in December, Fabrizio Ward found Kennedy's MAHA agenda was popular across party lines, except for his skepticism on vaccines. We shouldn't vilify all vaccines at all, no, but we should be able to have conversations about medications without fear of being persecuted, in my opinion. At a stop last month in Pennsylvania, kicking off his Take Back Your Health tour ahead of the midterm election campaigns, Kennedy told Politico he didn't much care about the politics. He stressed that allowing parents to make their own choices about what vaccines their children get is just an important issue from a public health point of view. Kennedy founded an anti-vaccine advocacy group. Do they call themselves an anti-vaccine advocacy group, though? Do they refer to themselves as anti-vaccine? Because if that's what they're doing, then I don't support that. But if they are being critical of products that are being released or have been released, then that can't be a bad thing, surely. We all need to be able to debate and criticize freely. Just because a product has been sponsored by a corporation doesn't necessarily mean that product is without fault. Every one of these pharma corporations are going to want to release products that aren't going to get them in trouble and aren't going to have faults. So it's in their own interests to release products that are roundly appreciated and liked, surely. Before coming to HHS, and has repeatedly linked the rise in the number of shots Americans get with a big rise in autism rates. HHS said last year the latest data shows that 1 in 31 children have the neurological condition, which affects their ability to communicate, up from 1 in 150 2 decades ago. That's a big leap. So there's definitely some contributing factor, whether it's the food they eat or the vaccines they take. Somebody needs to look into this. Studies have found no evidence to support Kennedy's view that vaccines are the cause. Autism experts believe the condition is mostly genetic and pointing to changing diagnostic criteria. In January, Kennedy removed 4 vaccines, notavirus, the flu, hepatitis A, and meningitis from the CDC's routinely recommended list for children. He previously dropped shots for hepatitis B and COVID. Kennedy, in a statement, said the change was aimed at strengthening transparency and information consent. It protects children, respects families, and rebuilds trust in public health, he said. Kids can still get the shots after parents consult their children's pediatricians, but the government will no longer strongly recommend that they do so. The changes don't directly affect vaccine mandates in school systems across the country because they're set by states. But they could influence policymakers in red states to relax certain requirements, and some state legislators are actively considering bills this year to do so. Kennedy has often cited CDC guidance during the COVID pandemic and the Biden administration's attempt to require about 100 million private sector government, military, and healthcare workers to receive the COVID vaccine, as the reason polls have found declining trust in public health and for dropping vaccine rates. Kennedy has argued giving parents more freedom not to vaccine will restore trust. If it becomes more of a buyer market, it's a conversation that needs to be had, and it's a conversation that a lot of these pharma companies don't want to be had because they have products that maybe they would rather were more profitable, and criticizing them publicly makes them less profitable. I'd like them to be profitable with products that people trust. So I imagine a more stable business plan for them would be to make sure that the public has confidence in their products by showing a whole lot of testing data and all that malarkey. Transparency is a good way to go. Perhaps that's easier to say than do, though. I don't know. And I certainly don't want to discourage the idea of vaccines at all. I'm not anti-vax at all. I'm just a skeptic of being corralled into anything. If I find that I'm being corralled into doing something, my first reaction is to swing, throw my trotters around. Get away from me! I'm not doing that. What is this? And that happened to be a good thing, I think, during the pandemic. Anyway. Yes. His overhaul of the CDC, Kennedy told senators in the Finance Committee in September, has consisted of absolutely necessary adjustments to restore the agency to its role as the world's gold standard public health agency, with the central mission of protecting Americans from infectious diseases. The vaccine policy changes are among Kennedy's most impactful policy moves, but the CDC has also become his albatross. Besides the concerns his moves have raised among Republicans, CDC officials who've left the agency have lambasted him in congressional testimony and repeatedly in the press. Blue states have moved to set up their own parallel system for combating disease, saying they've lost faith in the CDC. Outside advocates from the American Academy of Pediatrics to the American Public Health Association have brought suit to challenge the vaccine changes. As White House aides credit Kennedy with some of Trump's popular vote margin in the 2024 election, Trump has given him a wide berth on vaccine policy. Trump has said he also thinks kids get too many shots and in December issued a presidential memorandum asking Kennedy to align the U.S. childhood vaccine schedule with that of peer nations that recommend fewer. Soon, therefore, Kennedy moved to adopt Denmark's, dropping the number of diseases the federal government routinely recommends children get immunized against to 11, 6 fewer than before Kennedy became health secretary. There you go, that's a good recommendation. You've got an example nation there to show what the result might be. Public health experts said that made no sense, given the very different calculi about the cost and benefit of certain shots that went into Denmark's schedule. Heading into the midterm cycle, Kennedy's appearances on television and at recent rallies in Pennsylvania and Tennessee have focused on discouraging the consumption of highly processed foods and bringing down drug prices by pressuring manufacturers to lower them. A White House official, granted anonymity to discuss Kennedy's role in 2026, said vaccines will not be the primary focus going forward. At the Food and Drug Administration, Trump 1 and Trump 2.0 have spent the first year on Kennedy's tenure at war with each other. The FDA in Trump's first term sought to speed access to drugs in response to legislation the president signed in 2018 to allow terminally ill patients to use experimental therapies and the COVID pandemic. The pharmaceutical industry and conservatives on Capitol Hill were big fans. Yes, the Warp Speed initiative to get all these pharma companies to compete. There's a lot of mixed opinions about that. Probably a good thing in the end, but it's a difficult thing to sell to people as a good thing when they have been perhaps personally burnt by their experiences during the pandemic. The FDA under Kennedy has gyrated between the right to carry ethos and skepticism of drug safety and efficacy that has slowed and in some cases blocked novel drug approvals. The pharma industry was cautiously optimistic about Johns Hopkins surgeon Marty Marquet's nomination to lead the FDA. He'd long said he thought the agency was too conservative in some cases, as is hormone replacement therapy for women in menopause. Kennedy, too, even before Trump named him health secretary and promised to force the FDA to loosen up. But Kennedy and the top FDA aides he selected also shared a view that the government had misled Americans about the safety and efficacy of the COVID vaccines and that pharma industry influence was the cause. Over the last year, the agency has asked for more evidence from drug makers. The biggest advocate for raising the evidentiary bar has been Vinay Prasad, a former University of California San Francisco epidemiologist whom Marquet made the agency's top vaccine regulator. Soon after Marquet hired Prasad, the two announced plans to limit the approval of future COVID vaccines to people over 65 or with underlying health conditions that made them especially vulnerable, a marked change from the broad-based recommendation of prior years. They also said they wanted to see more data before signing off on new annual boosters. Prasad later pushed pharma company Sarepta Therapeutics to stop selling its drug for Duchenne muscular dystrophy over safety concerns. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a muscle-wasting disease that disables and then kills a small number of boys and young men each year. Most with the disease cannot expect to live past 30. Prasad's predecessor, Peter Marks, had overruled FDA career scientists in approving the drug for nearly all patients in 2024. Prasad's request of the drug maker came after Sarepta Therapeutics disclosed the deaths of 3 patients. In late July, Prasad was fired. Sarepta had protest his pressure campaign, and right-wing activist Laura Loomer, who has Trump's ear, had accused Prasad of being a progressive out of step with the president's agenda. She's a fiery lass, that one. Senator Ron Johnson, the author of the Right to Try law Trump signed in 2018, had complained to Kennedy and directly to Trump. In the days following his ouster, Marquet and Kennedy went to the White House much more frequently than normal to advocate for the vaccine chief's reinstatement, said one FDA official who granted anonymity to speak candidly. We can't cannibalize our own. was the mentality, the person said. Prasad was back at the FDA within days, but the management upheaval and debate over drug approvals continued. The agency's regulatory moves have often seemed contradictory, even as Prasad was pushing for tighter safety and efficacy reviews. For example, MAHA was rolling out a program to expedite them for drugs he deemed critical. Two top aides, George Tidmarsh and Richard Pazder, quit their posts leading the agency's drug review office, they said, because of MAHA's program. Tidmarsh and Pazder said the program put political imperatives above the analysis of career regulators. Now Tracy Beth Hogue, a spine doctor who came to MAHA's and Prasad's attention during the pandemic with her Twitter post, criticizes the government's response and COVID vaccine mandates. Heads the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. Hogue, a dual Danish-American citizen, has led the effort to downsize the childhood vaccine schedule. She praised Denmark's vaccine schedule in a meeting of Kennedy's vaccine advisors at the CDC in December and authored an assessment of the US schedule, comparing it to other rich countries. In January, to a vaccine maker's dismay, Kennedy moved to more closely align the US schedule with the Danish recommendations. Well, if they're good for them, perhaps they're good for us. Combined with the slowdown in novel drug approvals and Trump's efforts to force drug makers to lower prices, the industry that once felt reassured by MAHA's nomination now sees that the industry-friendly posture of Trump's first term has given way to something more populist. The powerful lobby that represents brand-name drug makers, which has tread carefully amid Trump's intense interest in lowering prescription drug prices for Americans, issued a rare public rebuke in response to Kennedy's downsizing of the vaccine schedule. The changes are not in the best interest of American families and add further confusion for parents and healthcare providers navigating an already complex system, said Mike Ybarra, Pharma's chief medical officer. There we go. That was a long article. I read it all. And the gist is, Kennedy wants to shake things up, and a lot of the people who are funded by Pharma, they don't like the idea of shaking up their gravy train. And perhaps some of them have points. Our healthcare industry does depend upon these large pharma corporations to produce products that are affordable. And there's the heightened cost of extended testing in order to make sure these products are safe. Perhaps makes some of these products more expensive. So Trump actually working on making sure our drug prices are lower comparatively these other nations is probably a good way of buffering that. If there needs to be more testing in order to increase public confidence in these vaccines or other products produced by these companies, perhaps that increased cost would then be padded out in the reduced cost of the medicines that we're now having to consume in the UK. I know from their perspective, a lot of their medications shot up in price and they were a bit salty about that. And I pointed out to them that actually, no, you've been living it up with your cheapo drugs over there because of the inflated prices we've been paying over here. So shush, you can pay a little bit more for your fat jabs, and and we all can pay a little bit less because we've been subsidizing your lifestyle. I like RFK. If it weren't for the fact I like Trump during the election more, I would have put more effort into supporting this chap, but I think his position that he has is a great station for him. And if people don't like what he does and butt up against him because of that, that's probably a good thing, because nobody is perfect and we all have to bump our heads together to find the best solutions together. So maybe the fact that you don't like him is a good thing, because maybe the way that you're conducting business needs to be shaken up a bit, and you need to re-examine your business models to inject more confidence in the public again. But that's my opinion. I think he's doing a great job. Keep doing it, sir. You've got my support. Big old thumbs up for you. Well done. Thank you for being you, sir. Thank you for joining me. But that is it for now. And the only thing I have left to say is, Pigwig, out.
Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squeak, oink, oink, wee, squeal, snort, snort, oinkity, squeak. Oink, oink, oinkity, squeak, squeak, wee, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinkity, oink, snort, snort, squeak, oink, 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 wee, 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 oh. Snort, snuffle, oink, squeak, squeal, wee, snort, oinkity, oinkity, oink, oink. oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, re-squeeze, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, re, snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinkity, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 re, squeal, squeal. Snort, shuffle, oink, re-squeal, re-snort, oinky, oinkity, oink, 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 snuffle, re-squeeze, snort, oink, squeal, oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, re, snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 re, squeal, squeal, snort, snuffle, oink.